This is Carl White from the Lone Adventurer Solo RPG podcast, and you are listening to Tale of the Manticore.
The following podcast is intended for a mature audience. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome back to Tale of the Manticore, Season 3. Like the creature from which it takes its name, Tale of the Manticore is a mashup, a crossbreeding between two different species of storytelling. Here you will find the unpredictability of old-school paper and dice games with the storycraft of a dark fantasy novel. No character is sacred, and none will be spared if the dice decide their fate is at hand. According to lore, the tale of a manticore is barbed with cruel iron spikes. There will be much pain in the days ahead. Last time on Tale of the Manticore. In the last chapter, Achillea's party is joined by Edo, an outlaw who's running from his former companions. Those people think, rightly or wrongly, that Edo tried to poison them with bad mushrooms and are out for revenge. So things do not look good when the PCs walk into a wooded area and right into their trap. 3 archers, hidden in the trees, have arrows fixed on them. Achillea considers fighting and surrender as her worst options, so she runs. Immediately, arrows are loosed, and while she, Cord, and Robin get away, Edo is slain. On the bright side, the archers do not pursue, and after a few hours, Achillea and her companions are clear of danger. They find a hidden spot to rest for the night, and the next day, the quest north resumes. That day passes without incident as mile after mile roll by underfoot. On the 5th day of travel, now about 50 miles from home, the dice gods decide that another random encounter will take place. Achillea hears an evil laugh and a cry of pain from somewhere nearby. She would have snuck away, not wanting to get involved, except for one thing. The voice she hears crying out in pain is speaking in Elvish. Chapter 6, Part 1, Day 6, Dusk. Mythic event meaning, cruelty competition. Party status, Achillea, 4 out of 4 hit points. Cord, 6 out of 6 hit points. Supplies. The companions have no food and 2 portions of water remaining. Spells available. Achillea has memorized Shrink. There it was again, and if there was any doubt left in Achillea's mind, it was gone now. That was Elvish. She knew the first 5 words. They were, I will fight like a something. The 6th word was unfamiliar. Achillea realized that Cord was looking at her intently. When she turned to face him, the wooden head creaked as it twisted. Don't do it, said those painted-on eyes. But Achillea did not feel like she had a choice.
I understand it's dangerous, but I have to know.
She got up and left the shelter of her tree, with Robin still atop her head and Cord following close behind. At first, she was unsure which direction to go, but then, almost as if by providence, the whip crack returned, along with more laughter, voices speaking loudly in a rude language she could not understand. So now she knew which way to go. She tried to remain quiet as she went. For the most part, this effort failed, but whomever she was approaching did not seem to be on the alert for any intrusion. Although Achillea did not yet know it, they were very much distracted. As she drew closer, she smelled smoke, and shortly after saw the orange glow of a little campfire some 100 yards distant. Although it spoiled her infravision, she figured the noise it made as it snapped and popped was a boon overall for someone trying to sneak up. Now she saw what was making the noise. In the previous episode, when I rolled up this wandering encounter, I got a 4 on a D8. That result told me the encounter would be with 1 or more evil humanoids. The next roll gave me when the encounter would happen, night, and a 3rd and 4th roll told me the humanoids would be surprised, but that Achillea would not. I could have taken that opportunity for Achillea and her party to give these monsters the slip. From a meta perspective, that might have been best for her. But then I remembered my mythic event meaning prompt and realized there was a way to advance the plot here. While it would introduce some unnecessary risk to the PCs, it had the potential to help them as well. Risk and reward, you know? My event meaning prompt is cruelty competition. I had this idea that some humanoids would have a captive and would be playing a sadistic game with them. Simply any captive would not do. I needed something that would almost force Achillea to interfere, so I decided that she would hear the Elven language. No way would Achillea be able to ignore an opportunity to meet the only other elf she has ever come across. And since she has the advantage of surprise, I think it's fair to allow her to sneak up on this group without risk of discovery. In short, she gets to take an action before being seen. Speaking of surprise, I think I'll wait to reveal what kind of humanoids they are until we get to the narrative. But before that happens, I need to know how many of them are here. I'll say 2 to 4, rolling a d4 and ignoring a 1. 3 monsters. Okay, let's catch up with Achillea and find out what she sees at the enemy camp. She was still some 40 yards distance away, crouching behind and peering over the trunk of a fallen ash. Ahead, in a clearing well lit by a small campfire, were 3 brutish figures. Each wore bulky armor of studded leather and carried a weapon at their belt. They were as tall as men, or taller, and thick of both limb and torso. But these were not men. They had faces like pigs' faces, with upturned snouts, small black eyes, and pointed ears. Their skin was a scarred pinkish gray. All 3 of them were surrounding a much smaller figure, someone even smaller than Achillea, who had been stripped to the waist and manacled to a tall stake set in the earth. The captive had long, wild black hair. Their skin was crisscrossed with angry red welts. A whip was being passed between the 3 brutes. Achillea thought they were orcs, though she'd only ever heard of their species from Aldve's lessons. Each orc took a turn, lashing their prisoner, and then passing the whip to the next orc. Soon it became clear that they had made a game of it, laughing and arguing between strokes over who had made the victim cry out the loudest. The prisoner twisted, and Achillea could now see it was a male, and also did not look as she had expected. He had pointed ears like her own, but he was smaller and slighter than she was. His wrists were so slender that the manacles barely kept him restrained. His face made him look young and old at the same time. With his jaws clenched tight and his eyes pinched shut, he obviously understood the rules of the game and was trying not to give his captors any satisfaction. But the next lash of the whip came down with a ferocious crack, drawing blood and an outcry. Achillea felt Cord touch her shoulder. She knew what he was going to suggest and shook her head no without even looking at him. She had to try to save this person. Her mind first went to the potion in her satchel. If she could somehow give it to him, he would be able to escape. But no, she would have to do more than give it to him. She'd need to personally pour it into his mouth, because the top of the stake with the manacle chains attached was too high up. The chains didn't have enough slack for the prisoner to drink it by himself, so that wasn't going to work. She cleared her mind. There must be some other way. She once again noticed how small the prisoner's wrists were, and how the manacles barely prevented him from slipping free. Suddenly, she knew exactly what she had to do. Chapter 6, Part 2, Day 6, Night. Mythic event meaning. Cruelty competition. Party status. The party status is unchanged. Achillea instructed Cord and Robin to stay put while she went ahead. The wooden construct didn't like it, but she would not be deterred. This was not just a chance to save someone's life, but an opportunity to learn more about her own people. The creature had spoken Elvish. Achillea crept up, with her heartbeat quickening. She chose carefully where to put her feet, avoiding fallen branches and dried leaves as best she could. The noise from the orcish camp made her effort superfluous and only served to slow her down. The sudden noise made her freeze and turned her legs to jelly. As the orcs grunted in laughter, Achillea found herself paralyzed with fear. Her brain told her legs to move, but they would not obey. The orc holding the whip, it had small yellow tusks and a shock of iron-colored hair, raised the weapon in the air and declared something in its guttural tongue. One of the other orcs reached up for the whip, arguing back. Achillea realized that if she'd moved faster, she might have spared their captor that last lash. The accompanying rush of guilt was enough to make her feet move again. She sensed an opportunity, and before she knew it, she had picked up a rock from the forest floor and cocked back her hand. Ahead, the first orc was shoving the second with a meaty hand and spraying out his retort. Achillea threw the rock. It sailed over the orcs' heads, missing them by a good measure, but she had never intended to hit them. The timing was good, and the rock struck the bushes on the far side of the clearing just as the first orc finished speaking. The mood in the orc camp changed immediately. As one, they drew their weapons. They first looked at each other, and then started walking towards the sound. Orcs are not highly intelligent or organized, so I think Achillea's distraction has the chance to draw away all three enemies. Let's ask the dice. On a d6, a 1 to 2 means one orc investigates while the others stay put. On a 3 to 4, 2 will go. On a 5 to 6, all three will. The roll. Nuts. I've rolled a 2. Only one orc will go. The biggest orc wheeled on its fellows. Before stalking off alone with his weapon raised. This was not the result Achillea had hoped for, but it was better than nothing, and with the alarm raised, there was no turning back now. She raised her hands and drew an arcane symbol in the air as she cast the spell Shrink on the captive. The spell Shrink, when cast by a first-level magic user like Achillea, causes the target to become smaller by 10%. It requires the caster to be able to see the target, but doesn't require touch. The spell description says an unwilling creature gets a save. I hope I'm not being too much of a rules lawyer to suggest that an unaware creature is not the same as an unwilling one, and so I'm ruling that the spell will work without needing to roll for it. The captive is about 4.5 feet tall, so he'll shrink by almost 6 inches. That's not much, but it is enough. The prisoner's hands slipped free of their shackles. He looked at them in wonderment. A heartbeat later, the two orcs, ordered to stay behind, turned around and saw what had happened. Achillea didn't hesitate.
Honela!
She called. This way, in Elvish. The captive's strange young old face snapped up at her words, and she had time to think how large his eyes are. Then he was sprinting right at her. When she judged that he could see her, she called out again.
Ettore Narenkin!
And then herself turned and started to run back to where she had left Cord and Robin waiting. The two orcs immediately gave chase. Last season, I introduced a pursuit mechanic that I think works pretty well. It goes like this. Pursuer and pursued both roll for initiative until one side has 3 successes. There's a twist. Each round must introduce a new modifier. This encourages a faster resolution and provokes narrative ideas. Since I have one of the 3 orcs investigating a sound in the woods on the far side of the clearing, I'll say that only the remaining 2 can act right away. The third orc will trail by, what's fair? I'll say 2 rounds. Okay, enough rules talk. Let's get into the action and begin. Pursuit. Round 1. I'm awarding a +1 to the party to account for Achillea's surprise advantage. The orcs. 2. The party. 2 + 1 is 3. There's a moment where the captive is so bewildered by his sudden freedom that he simply stands there, staring at his hands. Then his brain registers the sound of his own language and concludes he must be getting rescued. He tears off in the direction of the voice, leaving the remaining 2 orcs flat-footed and confused. but they don't hesitate for long, and once it's clear that they are not under attack, they give chase. Pursuit round 2. The party will get a +2 while the orcs hesitate. The orcs. A 6! Oh no! The party. 5 + 2 is 7. Despite their size and the denseness of the woods, the orcs are surprisingly fast. They crash through the undergrowth, barking obscenities in their language. But the captive is even faster. It's not long before he sees the little shape of his savior, who steals a quick glance over her shoulder before racing on ahead. Pursuit, round 3. The party will get a +3 as the big orcs struggle to maintain their initial burst of speed. The orcs. A 3. The party. 5 + 3 is 8. The party's last roll wasn't even necessary, strictly speaking. Even on a 1, they would have gotten away. But making the roll shows me how completely they outstrip their pursuers. While the orcs manage a good chase for the first minute or so, they cannot maintain it. Their size and the bulky armor and weapons they carry make them tire quickly. Conversely, Achillea's party is almost completely unencumbered, and compared to the orcs, even Cord is small and fleet of foot. That's why, by the time the party stops to rest, the orcs are far, far behind them. Achillea and the former captive are about to meet for the first time, and that calls for a reaction roll. I'm going to add some modifiers, though, to reflect the circumstances. A +3 for her liberating him seems fair, if not conservative. Also, Achillea speaks his language. Normally, that'd be worth another +1, but since she doesn't look the way he expects her to, that is, like an actual elf, I'm not giving it to her. Still, +3 is very good, so this should work out all right. Then again, you never know. Let's ask the dice. On 2d6 +3. Only a 5, but the +3 brings it to an 8, which is slightly on the positive side. I'll interpret the roll like this. The freed captive won't run away, but he'll be extremely standoffish, at least at first. A quick note here, so long as I have the action paused. The captive and Achillea will be conversing in Elvish, but I'll translate the dialogue as we go. Podcasts don't do subtitles very well, after all. Okay, it's time to get back to the narrative and listen to this play out. Achillea had run and run until her throat burned and her legs felt like they would give out underneath her. Finally, when she could run no further, she stopped to rest and allow the others to catch up. She was still breathing ragged breaths, standing with her arms akimbo in front of a tall maple, when the stranger emerged from the bracken. By then, Cord and Robin had already caught up. It was a strange moment when the 4 of them came together.
Skiriako Thrasindia,
gasped the former captive in Elvish.
Skirikaska.
He was doubled over with his hands on his knees and panting hard from the exertion.
I think so.
Replied Achillea, also in Elvish, only just now getting her wind.
Oh, let me undo the enchantment.
With a wave of her hand, the spell was broken, and the stranger returned to his former size. The change was barely perceptible.
Skirikaska,
he said again. When he looked up, and the two saw each other up close, both he and Achillea stepped back in surprise.
what manner of being are you? How is it that you speak my tongue?
He asked in Elvish. Achillea was momentarily stunned. She had wanted to ask the same question. This person was very odd to look upon. His face had the features of a child, but was also somehow time-worn.
I can speak Elvish because I am an elf,
she replied.
No, you are not,
said the other slowly.
Why do you say that?
Asked Achillea.
Because I am an elf, and you do not look like me.
Thanks for listening to Tale of the Manticore. If you're enjoying the show and would like to help to support it, there are lots of ways to do so. You can recommend the show online or to friends. You can like and repost episode announcements on social media. You can pick up One Shot in the Dark, the Pendulum World Building Tool, or Encyclopedia Manticorica on DriveThruRPG. And speaking of my offerings on DriveThruRPG, stick around after the credits for a special announcement. Where was I? Ah, yes. You can also purchase a Tale of the Manticore t-shirt at www.beararts.store And finally, you can rate or review the show on your podcatcher of choice. I am very grateful for any and all of your support. As you know, I like to read a listener review at the end of each episode. This one was left by Well On The Way via Apple Podcasts. And this is another one of those long overdue read-alouds that slipped through the cracks in previous seasons. Well On The Way writes, well produced and very well played. Good story that gives folks wanting to try RPGing a good place to start. Thanks very much for that review, and my apologies for having missed it somehow. Better late than never, though, I suppose. Having missed 2 of these older reviews, I find myself wondering if there are more that I never discovered. If you're listening to this right now, and you once wrote a review that I never featured on the show, please email me or DM me, and I'll correct the oversight. I'm at Manticore Tale on X, Tale of the Manticore Podcast on Instagram, or taleofthemanticore@gmail.com. At this time, let's talk about this episode's voice talent. Making a return appearance on the show from that little bit of a teaser in episode 5 is Kai Allen, playing the rescued elf, whose name we have not yet learned. I've also got a quick cameo by Kevin Berenger, who gives voice to Orc Number 1. I think Kevin will be voicing a proper character in the near future, by the way. Thanks so much to both Kai Allen and Kevin. For those who would like to check out some of the show's miscellany, I keep a blog where I post all kinds of show and RPG-related stuff, like art, maps, tables, crafts, and show notes. You can find it at taleofthemanticore.blogspot.com. The adventure will continue on the next episode of Tale of the Manticore. It's the story where chaos rolls. Thank you for sticking around to the end. As we're coming to the end of 2024, I wanted to share a few thoughts, and I promise to keep it brief. Let's begin. It occurred to me at some point that I started Season 3 with a promise. You do not need to have listened to either of my previous seasons in order to jump into Tale of the Manticore and understand what's going on. I'd like to invite new listeners to get in touch and let me know if I haven't kept that promise. Have I glossed over anything in this season, or even in Season 2, without adequate explanation? I expect that by now I take a lot for granted in terms of my homebrew basic D&D rules, as well as some of my made-up shorthand terms, like semi-actual play, or minning out. Please do reach out if I've left you in the dark. taleofthemanticore@gmail.com is best, but my blogspot account would work too. Now, there's 3 things I mention in every episode that new listeners may well hear and think, huh? Because I know I've never talked about them in this season. Every episode ends with me thanking listeners for their support, and before I get to a listener review, I always mention One Shot in the Dark, the Pendulum World-Building Tool, and Encyclopedia Manticorica. What the heck are these things, anyway? They are 3 products I've put up for sale on the online store, drivethroughrpg.com. Here's a brief overview and some news. One Shot in the Dark. This is my ultra-light solo game that can be played start to finish in 90 minutes, or chunked up to play over multiple short sessions. The strengths of the game are probably its unique mapping system and its overall simplicity. Together, these factors have made it a hit with folks who want to introduce RPGs to their kids. That was never my intention, to be honest, but I'm thrilled that it found a home in the RPG space. One Shot in the Dark is my bestseller, and it is very close, just 50 copies away from going platinum. If you'd like to support the show and help me to reach this milestone, the game can be bought for $1.50. The Pendulum World-Building Tool. This product is special to Season 2 because I developed it in preparation of that season. It uses a this or that engine to, step by step, help you create the 500-year history of a custom settlement. It's not a game, but a world-building tool for writers and GMs. Pendulum is currently an Electrum bestseller, and it too is just 50 copies away from the next level. I'd love to see it go gold, and if this kind of thing piques your interest, please check it out. Pendulum costs 99 cents. Encyclopedia Manticorica. This is my living reference document that gets updated a few months after each season wraps. Its purpose is to collect all Tale of the Manticore lore in one place. It's pay what you want, and I encourage anyone to grab it for free, though many have used it as a way to give me a tip. I'm very grateful to all who have done so, but if you've got an interest in this document, please do help yourself to a copy for free, and please don't feel an obligation to pay a penny. Encyclopedia Manticore is currently listed as a silver bestseller, that's one below Electrum, but that's only because DriveThruRPG doesn't count free products as sales, technically. Considering that, it has done rather well. No complaints here. What's happening in 2025? If One Shot in the Dark goes platinum, I'm going to make and release an expansion module for it. Call it a stretch goal. This year, I'm also experimenting with merch in cooperation with BearArts.store. So far, we just have the single t-shirt design in a few basic colors, but we might start to offer a second design in 2025. We'll see. My gratitude to those who have supported the show by purchasing a t-shirt or one of my drive-thru RPG products, or both. And, of course, I'd like to thank each and every one of you just for listening. As we move into the coming holiday season, I'm wishing you all the best in health and happiness. I'll see you, Achillea, Cord, and Robin in the next episode.